Good day to our distinguished colleagues, esteemed speakers, and dedicated pediatric professionals joining us today from across the vast and vibrant Asia Pacific region. It is my distinct honor to welcome you warmly to this crucial collaborative webinar, proudly co-hosted with the respected Sri Lanka College of Pediatricians. This partnership underscores our shared commitment to the most vital mission we have, that of safeguarding the health and ensuring the well-being of every child in our diverse communities. Today, we focus on what has rapidly become one of the most pressing public health crises of our generation, that is childhood obesity. The Asia-Pacific region, with its rapid urbanization and changing lifestyles, is facing an alarming surge in its prevalence, threatening to reverse decades of progress in child health. And if we do not act decisively now, this burden will lead to a generation dealing with early onset of complex and chronic non-communicable diseases, increased healthcare costs, and a reduced quality of life. Our program today is carefully structured to tackle this multifaceted challenge head-on through three highly relevant topics. First, we will establish the context with the growing burden of childhood obesity in the Asia-Pacific region, magnitude, trends, and challenges. Understanding the scale and trajectory of the problem is the necessary first step towards effective intervention. Next, we shift to prevention and control with the role of physical activity in preventing and controlling childhood obesity, strategies for the APPA region. This session is vital, providing us with practical, culturally adaptable strategies to promote active lifestyles. Finally, we address the critical environmental factors in the influence of food marketing on childhood obesity, addressing commercial issues and promoting healthy choices. We must examine the powerful commercial forces that shape dietary habits and develop policy recommendations to protect our children from harmful marketing practices. To guide us through these complex discussions, we are privileged to have a stellar panel of subject matter experts, including specialists from the Philippines, the World Health Organization, and our co-host in Sri Lanka. Your insights and regional expertise are invaluable. I extend my profound thanks to our speakers and to the leadership and organizing committee of the Sri Lanka College of Pediatricians, led by Professor Pujita Wickramasinghe, for their tireless efforts in bringing this important scientific session together. I wish all participants a most fruitful sharing and learning webinar. Let us work together, leaving this session with renewed commitment and actionable strategies to ensure a healthier future for all children in the Asia Pacific. Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce to you the moderator for this webinar. Professor Sumudu Seneviratne is a pediatric endocrinologist who has interests in childhood obesity as well as DOHAD phenomena. She is currently a professor in endocrinology at University of Colombo, Sri Lanka. Let us all welcome Professor Sumudu to introduce our panel of speakers.
Very good evening to everyone, and thank you, Dr. Jocelyn, for that kind introduction. I'm sorry my video is not working, but I hope you can hear me clearly. So it is indeed a great privilege, honor, and pleasure to introduce the three eminent speakers that we have lined up today for today's webinar on childhood obesity. Our first speaker today would be Dr. Emma Lanto, who is a pediatrician who specializes in adolescent medicine from the Philippines. Dr. Lanto is currently the Regional Vice President for East Asia of the International Association for Adolescent Health. She works as a consultant of the Division of Adolescent Medicine at the Department of Pediatrics at the Philippine General Hospital, where she was a co-founder of the Teen Mom program as well as the Healthcare Transition program. Dr. Lanto has been a past president of both the Philippine Society for Adolescent Medicine Specialists as well as the Society for Adolescent Medicine of the Philippines. She is a fellow of the Philippines Pediatric Society and the Philippine Society for Adolescent Medicine Specialists. Dr. Emma Lanto will speak to us on the growing burden of childhood obesity in the Asia-Pacific region, magnitude, trends, and challenges. This will be followed by the next speaker, Professor Anthony Oakley. Professor Anthony Oakley is a distinguished professor of public health at the University of Wollongong, Australia. Shall I continue with the introduction? Yes, thank you. So,
Yes, please go ahead, Sumudu.
yes, so thank you. Professor Anthony Oakley would be our second speaker. He's a distinguished professor of public health at the University of Wollongong, Australia, and an NHMRC Leadership Fellow. He's also co-director of the WHO Collaborating Center for Children's Food, Nutrition, and Physical Activity. Professor Oakley's research focuses on movement behavior in children with a particular focus on low and middle income countries. He has led the development of national 24-hour movement guidelines in Australia and provided mentorship for similar guidelines in South Africa and the South Asia Pacific region. Further, he has worked as a consultant for the WHO, UNICEF, and the World Bank on a number of projects related to children's physical activity and currently leads Sunrise, an international study for movement behaviors in early years involving 68 countries. Further, Professor Oakley is a reputed researcher with an impressive H index of 102. He has published over 400 peer-reviewed journal articles. And Professor Anthony Oakley will speak to us today on the role of physical activity in preventing and controlling childhood obesity strategies for the APPA region. Then the third speaker for the day would be Professor Tilakavati Karupaya, Strategic Research Interest Professor of the School of Biosciences, Faculty of Health and Medical Sciences, the Taylor's University, Malaysia. Professor Karupaya is an accredited practicing dietitian with the Dietitians Association of Australia. She was formerly professor and head of the dietetics program of the University of Kebangshan, Malaysia. And she's also adjunct faculty member of the Wayne State University, Detroit, USA. She has contributed greatly towards the legislation, clinical practice, education, and research in the fields of cardiovascular and renal nutrition in Malaysia. And in recognition of her services, she has received the Joel D. Kopler International Award from the United States National Kidney Foundation Council on Renal Nutrition in 2017, becoming the first Asian to win this award. She's also an experienced researcher and is currently integrating her skills in food environment analysis with the INFOMAS, the International Network for Food, Obesity, Non-Communicable Disease Research Monitoring and Action Support. Professor Karupaya will speak to us on the influence of food marketing on childhood obesity, addressing commercial pressures and promoting healthy choices. So that would be the eminent panel who will be addressing us today.
Thank you so much, Professor Sumudu. So we may now call on Dr. Emma Llanto.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to share my slides. Can you see my slides, Dr. Josie?
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Yes, thank you again for this invitation to talk about a very urgent and relevant topic. And before anything else, I was born last century. So when I was growing up, although I grew up in a city, we still had space to play with neighborhood kids, to play games, to climb trees, pick fruits. We had to stay outside. It was nice to stay outside because there was no TV. It only came on at around 6 p.m. So there was no reason to stay home. As snacks, we take boiled bananas, uh, kamote, that's a sweet potato, or bread. And then if we had a little bit of money, which wasn't very often, we'd go to the neighborhood variety store. We call it a sari-sari store. So it would sell rice and eggs and some canned goods, bread, candy, chocolates, of course. There was already Coke when I was a kid, but it was just for very special occasions. And we even had magazines that you could rent out. Now, fast forwards a few decades later, after uh, after changes in lifestyle, urbanization, this is how the Sari Sari store looks now. It is just full of all these chips, uh, chocolates, candies, biscuits, soft drinks, iced tea. Um, all of these just to me represented the challenges. This is the current food environment of our children right now, well, in the Philippines. And so this really just represented to me the big problem that we are facing right now. And so, in the next few minutes, I'd like to talk about the growing, literally, burden of childhood obesity in our region, the magnitude, trends, and challenges. I have no conflict of interest to declare. And this is the outline of my talk, just quick definitions, discussion of the impact of obesity, the trends both global and regional, like to talk about the social determinants of health using the socio-ecological model and just go through the challenges I'm sure you already are very familiar with. Okay, so these are some of my references. And let's start with definitions, just really basic ones. We define for children under 5 years, we use the WHO growth standards. And overweight is defined for weight for height that is more than 2 standard deviations from normal. Obese as those with a weight or height of more than 3 standard deviations. Now, for those who are 5 to 19, we use the body mass index. So we compute for the body mass index using the height and the weight of the patient and plot it on a specific BMI chart, WHO. There's for both male and female. And we define overweight as any BMI that is beyond, that is more than 1 standard deviation, and obese as those with BMI of more than 2 standard deviations. So, but basically, these are numbers, but we have to really understand that um, obesity, and this is from the AEP clinical practice guidelines published in 2023, is now considered a complex chronic disease. Now, these words are really heavy because complex meaning that, well, in a way, it's complex because of all the factors that go into it, and also because of all the complications and the implications of having a disease like obesity. It's chronic because it tracks into adulthood, and many of the problems will persist into adulthood. And disease because it's not it's not like a lifestyle choice. It's not because of uh, uh, having just poor choices. It is a disease, and this also makes sure that we destigmatize obesity. And AAP continues that it requires prompt, intensive, and comprehensive action through early diagnosis and treatment, preferably under the guidance of a multidisciplinary team, because the complications will span a lot of the systems, our system. Okay, so as healthcare providers, we are very familiar with the impact, the medical impact of overweight on obesity, practically head to foot, neurologic, cardio, respiratory, gastrointestinal, renal, musculoskeletal, endocrine. We're all familiar with this, but I'd like to emphasize the psychosocial impact, especially on adolescents who are just forming their establishing the identity, who are very sensitive about their body image, are very sensitive to the feedback by peers, and so they are very vulnerable to stigma, discrimination, and bullying. And these have very profound implications in terms of lowering self-esteem, depression, anxiety. And we have seen many patients who come in, and sometimes it's so difficult to treat, the medical part of it, unless you address the psychosocial aspects like depression. Uh, all of these also might result in body dissatisfaction and disordered eating. So you can have an eating disorder even with children and adolescents with uh, overweight and obesity. We are all familiar with the impact of obesity later in life. You can have heart disease, diabetes, um, hypertension, and this tracks into adulthood. And we are all familiar with, um, in my country, the top three killers of adults are heart disease, cancers, and strokes. And these NCDs actually account for 70% of the deaths in the Asia and the Pacific. Like to just, this probably is familiar to you, just really how emphasizes how important it is to develop good habits during childhood and adolescence, because unhealthy eating, excess alcohol, physical inactivity, and tobacco use contribute to about 75% of the NCDs later in life. So, as pediatricians, we really have a huge responsibility to build a good foundation for future health of our children and adolescents. Now, taking care of sick people with complications of overweight and obesity will cost money, and because of the rapid, the just the magnitude of the problem, they're expected to have rapid increases in their indirect and indirect care costs. Uh, Direct, this is medication, hospitalization. Indirect are like the days that you miss work, disability, and even death, premature death. And right now, it is uh, the cost right now is 2% of the world's GDP. And if there's nothing that significant will be done, it can increase to 3%. And that is translated to 4 trillion US dollars on the cost and indirect health costs because of overweight and obesity. Now, these are the global, and I'd like to present the global and regional statistics. And I draw the statistics from these two recent UNICEF publications, just 2025. Please take a picture so that you can read. This is really so significant and important in our understanding of what's happening right now in our world. And the global statistics come from um, this feeding profit, and the regional statistics come from um, this uh, publication entitled Turning the Tide on Childhood Overweight in the East Asia and the Pacific. So very specific to our region, and you'll understand why there's a unique, there's a publication for our region. Okay, so trend number one, uh, there's been a doubling of the prevalence of overweight between 2000 to 2022. That's about 2 decades. So we see here a very steep rise, and these are among those school children 5 to 19. No? And we should also understand that every region is now affected, including low and middle income countries like the Philippines. And this used to be a problem among high income countries, but now we are sharing the burden. Now, in terms of numbers, almost 500 million children and adolescents live with overweight. And 0 to 4 year olds constitute 5% or 35 million. School age, this is how UNICEF is presented the data. School age 5 to 19 comprise 20% of those with overweight and obesity. Now we see from this chart that the problem starts early, no? And early on, it's the boys who are affected, but as they enter adolescence, it's the women, the females who get more have more prevalence incidence of overweight and obesity. Now, the publication also says that more than half of those children and adolescents who live with overweight live in just 3 regions of the globe: Latin America and the Caribbean, South Asia, and East Asia and the Pacific. Now let's go to the regional trends. It's estimated that 25% of all the children in the world who live with overweight and obesity are living in our region. And again, I'd like to present that we see a very steep rise. It's more than double, no? There's the doubling in the past 2 decades. And we see that
Bakit ano?
overweight and obesity among the younger one has kind of stabilized. In South Asia, it doesn't seem to be very steep. It doesn't seem as high, but we see also that the rise has been quite steep, very steep. No, so it is alarming. Okay, so let's compare the prevalence in our region and the global statistics. So it says here that our prevalence in our region is 22.3% versus the global prevalence of 20%, so higher in our region. And again, the pattern was a doubling in the past 2 decades. Now, which country have very high? When you say very high, the prevalence is more than 20%. So the Pacific Islands, yes, New Zealand, Australia, Singapore, Korea, Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, China. High, meaning between 15 to 20%. That's Vietnam, Laos PDR, Myanmar, and Japan. The Philippines is medium, but we're catching up. Unfortunately, that's Philippines, Cambodia. Well, Timor-Leste is still considered low prevalence. The second trend that we should remember. So the first is that there is a doubling in the world and also in a region. And the second trend is that low and middle income countries have the steepest rise in overweight. So this is a comparison with the data in gray, that was 2000 and the latest. And again, in all age groups, we see that among lower to middle income countries and upper middle income countries, we see the very steep rise in overweight and obesity. Now, notice that in the high income countries, it is not as steep, but still very high incidence and prevalence. Okay. Now, the third trend is that obesity is rising at a faster rate than overweight among school-age children. Again, so obesity is rising at a faster rate than overweight. So this is a chart among that covers 15 to 19 years old. And the blue, light blue represents overweight. We see that from 11% to 20%, that's a doubling. But in obesity, it's 3% to 8%, which represents 2.6 times, so more than double. How about a region? So this is data, East Asia and the Pacific. Let's focus on the rate of rise. So globally, it's 2.6 times in the past 2 decades. In our region, it's 4.2 4.5 times. So it's even double the very steep rate of rise uh, compared to the global rate. Okay, the, the, the fourth trend is really quite disturbing. It says here that the data says that obesity has overtaken underweight as the more dominant form of malnutrition among school-age children. So there has been success in bringing down underweight in a in the world, but again, um, the gains are being eroded by the rising rate of overweight. So how is it in our region? It's it's 50%, 50 million or 10%, 10.7% living with obesity versus 26 million living with underweight or 5.7%. So this is a region as a whole, but if you look at the data from each country, there's some variation. For instance, Malaysia has actually double the rate of obesity is double that of the underweight. That's the same for Thailand. It's higher. The obesity is higher than the underweight. In countries like Indonesia, low PDR, Korea, it's almost the same rate. But there are countries where underweight, like, is still the more dominant form of malnutrition. Vietnam, Myanmar, the Philippines, Timor Leste. So, however you look at it, it's really quite distressing. This data is quite distressing. And the fifth trend that was identified by the publication is that diets of children and adolescents are loaded with unhealthy foods and beverages. These are like the sugar sweetened beverages. And also, quite alarming is the ubiquitous presence of ultra processed food. And this is the NOVA food classification system. And this is group number 4. Basically, all the things all the food that were shown in the picture earlier on from the sari sari store, the snacks, the ice cream, chocolate, instant noodles, mass-produced packaged breads and cereals and energy bars. Now, why are we concerned about these types of food? It's because these are calorie dense, because they're very high in sugar or high in fat and also high in salt. And they're ultra palatable. That means they're extra yummy. The food industry made them so just the right balance of of ingredients, so it's difficult to stop. Just think about how difficult it is to stop eating a bag of chips. But these have been engineered. No, this is not by chance. They really made it so that it's these are delicious. No, and they're cheap and convenient. You can anywhere, from the malls, the stores, schools. These are available. And exposure starts early in life. The cereals that we give to the kids, and there's also a lot of research, and this will be discussed by the third speaker, about aggressive marketing directed towards children. There's evidence that there's really a lot of lobbying. There's a lot of things going on that we are not aware of, that goes behind all these advertisements. Okay, so it's like a rising tide, and sometimes I feel it's a tsunami. The doubling of prevalence of overweight, and the shift of the burden from high income countries to low middle income countries, which have fewer resources, and the really shocking finding that overweight is overtaking underweight as the main dominant malnutrition form of malnutrition in our country. So what is driving the increase and the shifts in the prevalence? Um, we need to understand the factors, the factors outside the families that are driving this tide of overweight and obesity. And we also need to understand this so that we can think of viable solutions, no, that are really fit to our own environment. So using the socio-economical model, and it starts with the person, the family, interpersonal family, and institutional or the school, the community, and government policies. So among personal, there are some which are not modifiable. Race, genetics, birth weight, low birth weight are more prone to overweight later in life. Infant feeding, breastfeeding is protective. Knowledge, attitudes, and body image. Attitudes by families who, in our country, it's nice to have it's chubby children. And so um, it's
Freya, dalas Freya.
sometimes
Mawayang nga.
communicate,
Aday oni.
communicate to parents
Dada
that
siya
it's
si oni
great.
dati aja. Oni at.
Okay, so interpersonal, these are the family and family socio-economic status. It used to be that weight and obesity was higher among those who were rich. Right now, it's shifting. No, it's now also including those in the lower socioeconomic class, and food security. You know how affordability and availability of healthy choices. Uh, Having a single mom or parent also predisposes the modeling of eating, sleeping, activity, internet use, especially internet use right now, because this keeps our kids inactive. And families who are undergoing a lot of stress also are prone to overweight and obesity. Now, institutional, usually for kids, it's school. So availability of junk food or healthier options in the canteen, the presence of a playground where they could be physically active. This is also where weight stigma, and bullying can happen, which can have profound effects mentally on children and adolescents. Community, no, if you have uh, the presence of safe recreation areas, walkable neighborhoods with sidewalks, bike lanes, a safe public transport, so that parents can get home on time to to cook for their kids. The availability of affordable healthy food, the presence of fast food restaurants and delivery services, which is very common in my country, also will have an impact. And of course, exposure to food marketing, which is now really pervasive. It's TV, billboards, online. It's the way the food are packaged. So look at this, very interesting, very attractive colors with cartoon characters, and the very familiar toys that come with the food. So all of these are directed to children. So this has a huge impact, and this will be a topic that we should that will be discussed later on. And government policies, uh, investments in agriculture, so that healthier choices, healthier food will be available and affordable, and policies on food marketing and media. These are just examples. In Australia, a bill to ban junk food ads, and Mexico bans junk food in schools. In the Philippines, we had a bill as early as 2018 to tax sugar sweetened beverages, and we also had a department order as early as 2017 to that bans junk food and making healthier choices available in schools. Um, However, also what we need to understand is that policies on paper will not work unless they're implemented and monitored. Okay, so the challenges, I think this is just a short list, is the ubiquity of cheap and convenient ultra processed foods. There's food insecurity, so that it's difficult and it's expensive to get the healthier choices. There's unrestricted food marketing that's directed to children, and there's little to no access to parks, sidewalks, and bike lanes kids can play, where we can walk. And in my country, I just placed this, the implementation and updating of legislation that has been present but has not been really implemented and monitored. So these are I just added that as a challenge to what already have in our country. Okay, so what can turn the tide? And um, this is this I sourced this from this publication. What can turn the tide? So I thought, yes, we have to work, think about the layers, the social ecological model. So we have to work, continue our work with patients and families. We have to always remember to promote breastfeeding, which is protective, and also teach our parents the proper weaning food, the complementary food, and not to start with the sweet cereals. Um, Educate them on the steps to prevent obesity, the appropriate food, physical activity, limit gadget use, and always make sure that they have enough sleep because that has an impact on weight also. However, and as doctors, as recommended by the AEP, we should continue, monitor weight and BMI as they grow up so that we can detect overweight early. And if we do detect it, to do prompt intervention. We have to assess for comorbidities, the psychosocial impact using heads for adolescents, and the usual the mode of treatment. It's lifestyle modifications, medications, and surgery as appropriate, and it should be a family-centered approach. Uh, Clinical management is not part of my topic. I'd like to direct you to the latest AAP clinical practice guidelines of 2023. However, uh, individual efforts by families in our clinics may not be enough. They cannot turn the tide because our children and adolescents live in such, well, the UNICEF calls it a very toxic food environment. This is how it looks in my country. Everywhere you turn, this is what is available. So it is really beyond. I mean, there has to be something beyond the family, no? And there has to be changes in the systems. There has to be the government has to really step in and do its part. That's the only way to make any kind of significant changes or changes in the food environment that our children are now facing. And UNICEF recommends that the government must adopt policies to transform food environment. And these are some of the recommendations: marketing restrictions to protect children, front of pack FOP labels, taxes on sugar sweetened beverages, creating healthier food environments, and engaging young people in public policy making. Some of these will be discussed later on. Again, I'd like to mention that we in our country we do have legislation. It's just that these have not been implemented evenly. There are some parts of the country that have strong policies, but just maybe two or three cities, but the rest, no, it's everything. There's a lot to be done. And when I was preparing this presentation, it was really an eye opener for me. I was wondering, is there really what can we do? The problem seems so huge, and it needs government intervention. But I thought, as I was making the marketing this morning, that there's something that we can do. And so before that, I'd like to just to bring up the key points. Obesity is now defined as a complex chronic illness, and the trends are quite alarming, doubling. There's a doubling of the prevalence of overweight both globally and in our region. There are more obese than overweight children, and the burden is now shared by LMICs rather than just a problem of highly developed countries. And overweight is now overtaking underweight as a major form of malnutrition. And our children are living in a very unhealthy food environment. The impact we understand is medical, psychosocial, social, and economic. And this has a huge impact in our future. The drivers are multi-sectoral, especially outside the family home, and a call to action. Governments must um, impose policies and implement policies to transform food environment. And as I mentioned, this prep, I was preparing for this. It was quite overwhelming. I was wondering how we can, in the meantime, while all of the changes in the government, the policies that they want to impose and implement, and as I was doing our Sunday marketing, I thought that yeah, we just have to do mindful decisions every day as homemakers, as parents, as clinicians, and as advocates. We need to do everything we can within our power to help stem the tide of overweight obesity, which is really a crisis right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Emma.
I'd like to invite Professor Anthony Oakley to talk on the role of physical activity in preventing and controlling childhood obesity strategies for the APPA region, please.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just confirm that you can see my presentation slides okay?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, thank you, Tony.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you for this this webinar. Let's touch briefly on this first section because Emma has done such a good job in summarising this. And I'll move quickly through these slides, but when you look at this map, which comes from the World Obesity Atlas of Childhood Obesity, you'll see that by 2030, there are many countries in the Asia Pacific that will have over 1 million obese children. And that's going to place a significant burden on the health system in those countries. There's also a high proportion of children under the age of 5 who are overweight or obese. And of course, the concern there is if they have overweight or obesity at this age, there is a very strong likelihood that that will track into childhood, adolescence, and adulthood, and that these individuals will enter adulthood with a higher BMI, which means that the health impacts of a high BMI will kick in at a younger age and again have significant impacts on our health system. This figure shows the trends in the percentage of countries by World Bank income group where at least 10% of the children are overweight. And you can see here that we have reached saturation in high and upper middle income countries. And where the increase has been the most since 2010 has been in lower middle and low income countries. So it comes as no surprise that among children under 5 who are overweight or obese, nearly 90% of them live in low or middle income countries. And I would like to focus on what has caused this and what's the role in particular of healthy levels of physical activity, sedentary behaviour and sleep in addressing this high and increasing prevalence. Now, we often know about the short and long-term physical consequences of childhood overweight and obesity. But obesity in childhood is also associated with behavioural and emotional difficulties, such as depression, and this can also lead to stigmatisation and poor socialisation, and also reduce educational attainment and employment as an adult. So there's this cascade effect downstream, where we see significant other social, emotional, educational consequences of overweight and obesity that stem from or flow from these direct consequences. And in response to this, the Commission on Ending Childhood Obesity developed a report that was welcomed by the 69th World Health Assembly, who asked WHO to develop an implementation plan. And part of this implementation plan included guidance on healthy food habits and eating behaviours. And these are obviously important in the prevention and treatment of childhood obesity. But this talk will focus on the role of healthy levels of physical activity, sedentary behaviour, and sleep for children. And this was picked up in this final recommendation 4.12, where WHO were asked to develop guidance on these behaviours for young children. And in 2019, the World Health Organization released the first global guidelines for physical activity, sedentary behaviour, and sleep for children under the age of 5. And Professor Pujitha was part of the guideline development group for this project. And these guidelines used an approach that integrated these three behaviours and provided guidance on what's recommended over a 24-hour period for each of these behaviours. So for children aged 3 to 4 years, you can see here that it's recommended they do at least 3 hours of physical activity of any intensity, of which at least 60 minutes would be moderate or vigorous, which is what we would also refer to as energetic play. That there should be no more than 60 minutes of sedentary screen time and between 10 and 13 hours of good quality sleep. These guidelines are consistent with those that we have in the Asia Pacific, where we have a consensus statement for 24-hour movement behaviours for the early years, which was published in the Lancet Regional Health in 2023. And I know a number of paediatricians from this association were involved in the development of these guidelines. The Asia Pacific also has integrated 24-hour movement guidelines for children and adolescents, and these were published in the British Journal of Sports Medicine in 2021, and they include 10 evidence-based consensus statements. So for physical activity, accumulating at least 60 minutes of moderate to vigorous activity, an average, of 60 minutes each day of the week. So across a week, we're looking at an average of 60 minutes, engaging in activities that will strengthen muscle and bone, and these could be part of that 60 minutes as well. And weight-bearing activities are important as part of this. Light intensity activity is important, aiming to accumulate up to 12,000 steps a day, and also some precautions before and after being physically active. Not accumulating more than 2 hours a day of sedentary screen time, which does not include educational screen time but is recreational. Making sure that we break up sitting time, and getting 9 hours of sleep for 7 to 13-year-olds, at least 8 hours for 14 to 17-year-olds, and at least 7 hours for 18-year-olds. So this focus on movement behaviours, and when we talk about movement behaviours, these can range from no or little movement, like you see on the left-hand side of this continuum, all the way through to higher levels of movement in a defined period, such as 1 day or 24 hours. And if we summarise the evidence for one of these behaviours, such as physical activity, we can see that there's a range of benefits for children and adolescents that affect every body system, some more than others, but nonetheless, it is well known that physical activity has beneficial effects across a range of body systems and outcomes. But instead of considering these behaviours in isolation and just looking at, as we have traditionally, whether an individual behaviour has an association with health, we are starting to ask now more that what about the combinations of these behaviours, like we see on the right-hand side here, that might promote optimal health and well-being? And we are increasingly recognising that we have to consider all of these behaviours together if we want to know what's the best mix of movement behaviours to promote optimal health. Because often this is how they are accumulated. So this concept is what we call time use, and it's based on the fact that we only have a certain number of hours in a day, and we need to move beyond these traditional ways to thinking about what happens when these domains interact, when time spent in one domain is swapped for another, and how each of these changes might affect health and well-being, because this is how children and adolescents typically will accumulate their movement behaviours in today's contemporary society. So what do we know about these associations between 24-hour movement behaviours and obesity? Now, one way we can examine this is through compositional analyses. And in these analyses, which are often represented using ternary plots like you see here, the axes can be interpreted or defined as a percentage of time. So in this figure, the white point that you see shows a particular movement behaviour composition for a particular outcome. In this case, the outcome is waist to height ratio, which is often a measure of obesity and overweight. The relative contributions of sleep, which is on the left-hand axis of the triangle, sedentary time, which is on the right-hand side, and moderate to vigorous activity, which is on the bottom, at this particular composition can be determined by extending straight lines out to each of the axes. So for this example, sleep is 49%, sedentary time is 33%, and moderate to vigorous activity is 18%. Now, we've left out here light intensity activity because we can only fit 3 behaviours on this graph. So let's say that light intensity activity, like you see up the top here, is 5 hours a day. So we know then that the total duration for these 3 other behaviours is 24 hours minus 5, which is 19 hours. So therefore, we can calculate that the sleep duration at this point is just over 9 hours, sedentary time is just over 6 hours, and moderate to vigorous activity is just over 3 hours. So there have been 2 systematic reviews that have examined the association between 24-hour movement behaviour composition and adiposity. And the first of these found that in around half of the studies, the most ideal compositions of at least 2 of the behaviours was favourably associated with obesity. And the second study also found significant associations with BMI Z-score in half of the studies. I've just got a little bit of background noise. Could I just ask people to mute themselves if they're not muted? In compositional analyses, we can also show what happens when we reallocate time from one behaviour to another. So this figure shows the associations between reallocations and BMI Z-score in 9 to 11-year-old children from the longitudinal study of Australian children. And this is important because what you can see here is that when you take 45 minutes from moderate to vigorous activity, which is this light blue line, and you allocate it to sleep, because remember, we only have a finite number of minutes in a day, you will get an increase in BMI Z-score by 0.37 units. So we don't want to take any time from moderate to vigorous activity. If we're looking at all of a particular patient's or individual's movement behaviours, we want to protect this moderate to vigorous activity and, if anything, increase it, particularly when it comes to it being replaced by other movement behaviours. However, we also need to protect sleep, because you can see here that if you are going to ensure that adequate sleep is met in terms of meeting the guidelines, if we increase the sleep, or give time to sleep, we want to actually take it from sedentary time, because if we take the sleep from sedentary time, we're actually going to get a 0.18 decrease in BMI Z score. So this leads to the guidelines that we have around the integration of these behaviours, which is to try as much as you can to meet the guidelines for moderate to vigorous activity or work towards those. Try to protect the sleep and maintain adequate sleep. And then if you need to reduce anything, reduce the sedentary time and particularly the screen time. This study from New Zealand has also re-examined these reallocations, and it's shown something fairly similar. Significant associations at age 3 to 5, which are in red here, and a 10% increase in sleep. Now, this time it wasn't taken from one behaviour, but it's taken equally from the other behaviours, and this is associated with a significant decrease in BMI-Z score. So again, it reinforces the importance of protecting sleep. And again, an increase in sedentary time and even in light intensity activity at the expense of sleep and moderate to vigorous activity is going to lead to an increase in BMI-Z score. Now, these data here are taken from the Children's Healthy Living Program in the US affiliated Pacific, Hawaii, and Alaska. And these analyses are separated into children from low and middle income countries, which is this top panel, and high income countries, which is the bottom panel, just to show you that the associations are somewhat different between children from different countries. Each panel presents the associations between waist to height ratio as a coloured heat map and the composition of sleep, sedentary time, and MVPA at any given duration of light intensity activity. 5 hours on the left, 6 hours of light, and 7 hours of light on the right-hand side. These include moderate to vigorous activity, sedentary time, and sleep. And you can see here that the waist to height ratios, red and yellow, would indicate a higher waist to height ratio, unhealthier outcomes, and the blue is a more healthier outcome. So these compositional analyses show that the association with movement behavior composition was significant, and the estimated values of waist to height ratio appeared higher in the high income countries than in the low and middle income countries, because you can see here the high income countries have a lot more red and orange compared to the low and middle income countries. But the best compositions are slightly different between these two income groups. So for low and middle income countries, the best compositions seem to occur at low levels of light intensity, higher MVPA. So MVPA is what is critical here. Whereas the higher income countries, sleep seems to be more important of the three. Lower sedentary time is important, or light activity is important for both. So not all associations here are equal. So what can we do about promoting healthy levels of physical activity, sedentary behaviour, and sleep? First, we have to identify how our current lifestyles, environments, and behaviours have been impacted. Like Emma said before, a social ecological model is how we need to examine this, especially as a result of modern environments. One area where we've seen the biggest change is in digitisation. For this, we need to better understand the role of modern technologies, especially smartphones and tablets, on unhealthy weight. And these technologies are becoming more widespread globally, and our own research has found that many parents use them frequently in daily interactions with their child, especially to keep their child busy when they need to get things done and to calm their child down when they're upset. What we don't know as much about is, are these devices similar to traditional technologies such as television and videos in their associations with health? I pull out this longitudinal study because it examined associations between all media use and program viewing at ages 3 to 4, and how this predicted cognitive and psychosocial development 1 year later. And it did find, consistent with previous research, that program viewing, television, videos, predicted higher scores on externalizing problems and total difficulties. This was on the Strengths and Difficulties questionnaire. But it also is one of the few longitudinal studies that's examined the level of app use. And in this sample, we had about a third of children who didn't engage in app use at all, and we're able to categorize them as non-users, low-dose users, which is up to 30 minutes a day, or high-dose users, which is more than 30 minutes. And you can see here that compared to low-dose users, high-dose users had significantly lower levels of inhibition, one of the key executive functions. Screen devices can also impact on sleep, duration and quality, which are two recommendations from WHO: to not use screens in the 2 hours before bedtime and to not have screens in the room where the child sleeps. And this is quite widespread, and this is in a number of Asia Pacific countries here where around 2/3 use these devices in the 2 hours before bedtime, and about a third have screen devices in the room where they sleep. So that's something I think as a clinician that you can raise with your families. Now, a catalyst for promoting physical activity are the Sustainable Development Goals, and having higher levels of physical activity and taking a whole of society approach to do so will contribute directly or indirectly to achieving up to 13 of these Sustainable Development Goals. There's also the WHO Global Action Plan for Physical Activity, and I would like to encourage you to look at this. It contains 4 objectives, as you see here, and under these objectives sit a large number of policy actions. And the Global Action Plan also endorses a systems approach to promoting physical activity, and that is to best promote physical activity. Each of these 4 objectives need to come together, and key stakeholders need to consider the policy actions within each objective and then across the 4 objectives. So we would bring together people from health, from education, paediatricians, transportation, community health, urban planning, finance, and they need to be aware of what each other are doing and support one another in their endeavours to promote physical activity within their specific area. And the Global Action Plan also provides countries and stakeholders with an implementation plan, which outlines the steps needed to use a systems approach for promoting physical activity. I'll just give you a brief introduction to each of these and an example. So under Objective 1 sits actions like 1.4, which focuses on the training of those who are responsible for promoting physical activity. So for the education sector, this would include the professional development of teachers and educators. And there's evidence here from programs such as this one from Australia called Physical Activity for Everyone, which could be examined. But we certainly do need more examples from low and middle income countries here. This is one of the areas where we do have the strongest evidence, which is communication campaigns and integrating these with community-based campaigns. And there's been a number of these from high-income countries, Australia, US, Portugal, and the UK, the best known of which is the Verb campaign in the US. It's also been the most thoroughly evaluated, and it found that there was a significant association between children's and parents' exposure to the campaign and the proportion who are active, around 20 percentage points here. And this other figure here showed that there was an association between frequency of exposure and the number of free time physical activity sessions that were participated in during the previous week. One of the action areas for Objective 2 is about strengthening sports amenities and access to good quality public and green open spaces. And one of these is to implement these comprehensive health and economic assessments of public and green open spaces, which are just so important for children to be able to access, and which, with the spread of urbanisation, are becoming less common. And we have to take a stand to advocate for the rights of children to have access to opportunities to be able to play. There's also actions like this which focus on preschools and schools, and there are frameworks for this which are developed by WHO, which have global standards, which look at how these settings can promote healthy levels of physical activity, sedentary behaviour, sleep, and nutrition, and integrating and building the skills and knowledge of children, and providing supportive environments, and what's needed to work in partnership with families. In schools, there's guidance from WHO on how to use a health promoting schools approach, and this includes the school physical activity policy, which has these 6 domains. I will just note that what's good about this is it's broader than just what happens in physical education. Quality physical education is obviously an important domain here, but it goes beyond the school day and includes how you get to and from school. And there's opportunities for physical activity there. What happens in before and after school programs, and opportunities to promote physical activity throughout the school day. And finally, under Objective 4 sits actions like this, which focus on enhancing the systems that can provide quality surveillance data on physical activity. So the indicators here would include having surveillance data on physical activity, sedentary behaviour and sleep for children at a national level. And that's what we're trying to do in studies for children under age 5, like Sunrise. We have that with adolescents through the Global School-Based Student Health Survey, and there's also a need for this to be done at a primary school level as well. And that data here, as you can see from the Global Status Report, is much more limited in those younger age groups. So I will finish up there. I would like to thank the group, the Food and Movement Group from my institution, who have built a lot of this knowledge base around these movement behaviours. And I thank you for your time and your attention.
Thank you very much, Tony. And congratulations. Professor Sumundu.
Thank you very much. And now we'd like to invite Professor Tilakawati Karuppaya to talk to us on the influence of food marketing on childhood obesity, addressing commercial pressures and promoting healthy choices. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you.
Okay. Good evening. Are my slides being viewed?
Yes.
Okay, let me proceed. Well, I'm going to talk on, my talk will be covering food marketing on childhood obesity. The first speaker from the Philippines, Dr. Lanto, was talking a lot about the food environment. I will go into this one specific aspect here. Now, this is my disclosure. I've received funding from the International Development Research Center for some of the study data that I report here. Otherwise, I have no conflict of interest. My talking points in this talk will be looking at food marketing to children, which is a public health issue. And I will cover some of the WHO's warnings on this. I will examine how marketing impacts children's eating behaviors and explore policy. And I will not answer the question on community-based interventions to reduce unhealthy food exposure. And I think you will understand towards the second half why this is so. Now, I need to begin with talking about the food transformation that is occurring in Asia. It's began from the first phase onwards. I won't cover that. We are in the third phase. Pardon? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
We are in the third phase in this part, the first 2 decades of this century, where globalization of food trade and consumer tastes are fast-tracking our populations towards nutritional transitions. Now, the third phase, the 2 decades that I talk about, beginning this century, sees 3 remarkable developments. The foreign direct investment that is basically fueling or rather organizing retail growth and the proliferation of regional and international supermarkets in most of Asian countries. The second part is the nutrition transition that I talk about, which channels increase availability and the possibility of consumption of processed food products through this retail and is actively changing consumption patterns irrespective of urban or rural populations. And of course, the third part is the public health challenges of rising NCDs that are coming from this nutritional transition. My talk will basically focus on the second part, the nutrition transition. Now, the speaker from the Philippines was talking about change in the availability of packaged foods. Now, here, I would like here, going by the economic terms, the compounded annual growth rates measured for 7 of these countries here, right from low middle income countries to the upper middle income countries. You can tracking for between 2015 to 2020. You can see there has been an increased growth of modern grocery retail. But if we move to the right, which on the packaged food revenue, that actually is an indicator for the sale of processed foods. Now, irrespective of income status, you can see that the LMICs such as India, Bangladesh, Indonesia, and Vietnam have experiencing the highest growth rates in processed food sales compared to Malaysia, Thailand, or China. Now, essentially, the sale of processed foods has grown between 9 to 17% in LMICs, comparatively 5 to 7%. Now, most of it is coming through the modern grocery stores, but you're also having the traditional retail options, which are also pushing ultra-processed foods, as you can see that Dr. Lanto was speaking of in the Philippines. Now, moving to the core aspect. Childhood obesity in Asia is a major problem. You can see here that overweight children alone, the under fives are about 18, constitute 18 to 18.7% of Asian population compared to the rest of the world, which is only 20.2. So the prevalence of when you look at the prevalence of overweight and obesity, looking at the span of childhood from 5 to 19 years, you can see that for most countries is already breaching 20%, Brunei, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam is approaching that 19%, and the rest are above 10%, as you see here. Now, the aspects that has been blamed is the food environment, which is in Asian countries, essentially is reflecting a shift towards unhealthiness. You're having processed food high in excess calories and low, I'm sure, sorry, there's some voice over there, and low in nutrients. And these are being heavily promoted, widely accessible, and often cheap, okay? Now, food marketing is one of the key drivers in this unhealthy food environment, manifesting through branding, television advertising, and the spread of promotional information. Now, when we look at ultra-processed food as a driver for obesity development, I'm sorry, there's a voiceover, as for obesity development, we can hypothesize 2 models of obesity. The top is the energy balance model, where the primary dietary drivers are energy dense, ultra-processed foods, which are basically big in portion size, but also reflect high content of fat, sugar, fiber. They don't mention salt here, but essentially these are driving the positive energy balance and towards adipose tissue fat storage. The second model, which is the carbohydrate insulin model, the dietary drivers are basically driven by the high glycemic load foods and the high sugar, and they are different in their approach because they are pushing towards adipose tissue fat storage, okay? And the signals they emit are different. Now, essentially, what do we look at? The mechanistic insights from ultra-processed foods. They are of poorer nutritional quality, that's very clear. But from the view of obesity and NCDs, our concern is the energy and foods that are high in fat, sugar, and salt. Apart from that, those below this line are basically problems that come from contaminants, from the processes or packages, disruption of food matrices, and food additives. We are not going to go into that here. So let me move to the optics of food marketing. Let's appreciate that in the first place, that there are key aspects that when we talk about food marketing, we need to understand two aspects here. That food marketing predominantly controls foods that are high in saturated fat, trans fatty acids, we can collectively call that as total fats, free sugars or salt or HFSS foods, and that this food marketing is common in settings where children gather. That means essentially, sorry about that, schools, wherever children are, and the other part which I've made it big here is during children's typical television viewing times and on children's television channels. And moving on is food marketing is likely to grow big in the digital spaces, apart from the hard print media. So this part is generally we talk about in evidence. We're talking about the nature, extent, and impact of food marketing. And this is an aspect that has been raised by the WHO in an effort to move government policies to protect children from the harmful impact. These are the guidelines that came out in 2023. Okay, now our concern about food marketing is a cascade of effects that are coming from this aspect. And the commercial drivers of food marketing, if you take a look at it in blue, dark blue is basically sales. Sales need to push up because that's where the company earns the profit. And it means there's a big investment in marketing because marketing is going to drive the purchasing request. That's without doubt. And the food industry is far ahead of us, those who are concerned about the health aspects. They have invested in, I would say, the research and in terms of research, much more than research and development of new products. There's heavy investment in food marketing to understand consumer behavior, right from exposure to marketing, awareness of products and brands, changes in attitudes, normalization of products, taste preferences, desire for a product. What are the responsiveness to cues at the point of sale, checking out at the counter, and further exploring the intention to purchase. Now, ultimately, with all this, with a higher purchase, there would be greater consumption and, of course, sustained energy intake leading to an energy imbalance. So if you look at it, for the parent, pushing sales would be demand by their children. That's very much so. We call this pester power. And ultimately, this is what we have to worry about from the health point of view, because exposure to food marketing will likely increase the risk for developing diet-related NCDs through weight gain. Now, the WHO in 2012 became concerned about these aspects and gave recommendations regarding the marketing of foods and non-alcoholic beverages. We call it FNAB. And they focus on two elements in terms of marketing: exposure and power, with the view that exposure needs to look at the reach and frequency of marketing message, whereas the power should look at the creative content, design, and the execution of the marketing message. In other words, we have to parallel the marketing research approaches and study the impact on food preferences, purchase requests, and consumption patterns. So if we look at the impact of marketing as a function of both exposure and power, let's appreciate what this means. Exposure is essentially the reach, the percentage of people targeted, in this case, children who are exposed, and the frequency, the number of times an average person is exposed to that of a marketing communication, message, or action. So imagine television, what this is happening. So policies need to address children's exposure to food marketing irrespective of timing, venue, or intended audience, and should therefore go beyond children's media. This is what the construct of a policy should be. As regards power, which refers to the extent to which a marketing communication is disseminated, this power is directly influenced by creative content and strategies used. So understanding this persuasion aspects is important to be able to move policies. Yeah. So what we see in a snapshot is that food marketing works in terms of commercial communication, which is designed to increase brand recognition, brand appeal, and eventually purchase and consumption of that product. So when we talk about tackling the unhealthy food marketing, we need to look at exposure and power. And subsequently, I'm going to talk about this related to television, the reach and frequency of marketing messages, and the design and content of marketing messages. Now, there are studies when we talk about unhealthy food marketing that show very clearly that exposure and the usage of persuasive power strategies do actually negatively impact children's behavior and food consumption. This is an Australian study looking at the 10 to 12-year-old age group, which showed that cumulative exposure to television food advertising was linked to more positive attitudes and belief towards junk food. In the United States, which conducted with a randomized control trial, it was shown that children exposed to unhealthy food advertisements, which carried a healthy message, did influence biased attitudes towards advertised products. So that's very important to understand that marketeers are using healthy messages to package unhealthy foods. Now, this is our own study, which looked at the quantum of watching television, and we showed that in a younger age group, what we call primary school children, we showed that for every additional hour of television watching, the probability for children to prefer unhealthy food ads as their favorite television advertisement increased by at least 5%. So just imagine the cumulative effect when they watch. Most children we see are watching about 3 hours a day. Okay. Now, essentially, what are the persuasive marketing techniques to promote food to children on television? This came from a review that covered, I would say, Western countries, and they identified 5 aspects: premium offers, emotional appeal of fun, promotional characters, nutrition health claims. Yes, nutrition and health claims that claim that it's a whole grain, gluten-free, low-fat, 100% pure, or the theme of taste. So this is cumulative aspects that we look at for Asian countries. We see that power strategies are actually used strongly for television food advertising, using promotional characters, favoring cartoons, licensed characters, sports people, celebrities, movie tie-ins, famous sports persons, non-sports or historical events or festivals, for kids messaging, awards, sports events. On the other side, premium offers that are coming out are in terms of games and app downloads, contests, pay 2, take 3, 20% extra, limited edition, social charity, and so on. So you see that the strategies for persuasive intent is different. Now, this is a very recent paper that looked at the impact of food and non-alcoholic beverage marketing on children's and adolescent eating behaviors and health. It's a systematic review and meta-analysis. This is fairly recent, 2022. Essentially, in total, that the number of participants that were evaluated were about around 19,000, and about 80 articles, papers made it into this review and meta-analysis. Essentially, although there were no health impact, food marketing did show significant increases very clearly, in terms of, let's say, the standardized mean difference between food marketing versus less or no marketing. In terms of intake, that was about a 25% difference. Preference, that was about 30% difference. And the risk for the increase choice of that product by about 77%. So these are very important, but because this study also indicated there was no direct impact of health, it should not mean that this is a study with little value. No, most of the studies that we are looking at in terms of social science behaviors are basically constructed as cross-sectional studies with no health impact or very little. So let's move on to television food marketing to children in Asia. And let me show you some evidence. Now, when we talk about evidence, we look at 4 steps. The first is to look at content analysis, where we discern patterns of advertising. And this pattern of advertising must be replicated to be able to understand potential exposure. So we go through the aspects of recording media, measuring ads and content, and analyzing the report. This is a huge amount of data to analyze. Now, the second step is to benchmark the advertisements according to nutrient profile models. We adopt the WHO nutrient profile models. There are 2 that we use for Asia, that for the Western Pacific region, as well as the Southeast Asian regional office. So going by that, we also look at, we proceed to the third aspect, classifying the advertised foods as permitted or non-permitted using the nutrition profile models. And we determine what is unhealthy as not permitted based on cutoff points for healthful characteristics. We're looking at fat, saturated fat, sugar, fat, salt, calories, etc. Now, the fourth component that we look at is the metrics. We are measuring peak audience viewing time of children, and this is very important. Usually, the metrics are measured according to the viewing period is measured according to commercial ratings agencies. So we are able to track and look at the intensity of advertising during that peak viewing time. And for countries that can't afford commercial ratings, the option is to do a marketing study. Now, here is data that we looked at using this methodology. This was a study conducted in 2020 to 2022. We looked at the extent and nature of television food advertising. And the countries that participated were China, Malaysia, Bangladesh, Vietnam, Nepal, Philippines, Mongolia, India, Sri Lanka. And generally, we were able to look at cross-country comparisons, and we were able to see that irrespective of country income level, we see that not permitted food advertising dominated children's popular television channels. During the peak viewing time rates, irrespective of the criteria, whether it's Wipro or Southeast Asia criteria, the rate ranged around 2.4 to 2.29 for Malaysia, to the highest in the Philippines, 9.7 to 9.41 advertisements per hour per channel. So what you see here, we generated data looking at beverages, the sugar-containing bakery foods, and fatty and salty foods, fast foods, snacks, and cheese. Now, going to individual studies across Asia, in China, they have shown very clearly that there's an intensity or higher proportion of unhealthy food and beverage advertisements during a festival such as Chinese New Year. Further, more recently, China reported that alcohol advertisements were figuring very strongly during children's peak viewing times, and suggesting that there's a need to tighten regulations. Now, Thailand called for, also reported unhealthy food marketing dominating the channel, and called for government to tighten regulation. And in the Philippines, it was noted that the unhealthy food advertisements or not permitted foods were turning up during school days. The rates were higher during school days compared to non-school days. And peak viewing time was basically these ads. So let me move to the aspect about the politics of food promotion. Now, consumers are children of, and this is the largest consumer base for food companies. Okay, so the effects of food marketing on children are creating product awareness, establishing food preferences, and fostering purchase and consumption. And most of these effects are coming through advertising, food marketing on television. And most of it is high in fat, sugar, and salt. So there is an interplay between consumer preference and industry and innovation. We don't doubt that. But the aspect is, why is government not regulating this? Now, we did a case study looking at Malaysia and studying the pattern of regulation on food marketing to children. And we detected that there were more barriers than facilitators in the policy process that led to industry self-regulation. So here we say that industry, what is happening across Asia is industry is self-regulating rather than government regulating industry, which together indicates a lack of sustained public health advocacy. So the cited barriers are lack of political will, industry resistance, complexity of legislation, technical challenge, and lack of resources, particularly professional skills, to assess and monitor. Industry self-regulation has added barriers that are unique, which are blocking policy advancement. Because there's one, industry is indifferent to implementing what you call goodwill. There's lack of monitoring, poor stakeholder relations, and policy characteristics. Now, the key recommendations to move policy reform is to strengthen pro-public health stakeholder partnerships, applying sustained efforts in policy advocacy to overcome this inertia, and the need for monitoring, policy compliancy, and accountability. Now, this is the historical roadmap for food marketing policy processes. In red, the story is Malaysia. We began at the late part of the 20th century, and it goes on that industry-led self-regulation began with the launch of fast food advertising guidelines, which supposedly regulates fast food advertising on TV. That came out in 2007. And the launch of the Malaysia Pledge, which came about just after 2012, where industry voluntarily undertook that they would self-regulate. Okay, now I won't go into that. Now, recently we published an article looking at the phenomena of these two self-regulation policies on unhealthy food marketing on children's television. What we saw was unhealthy food marketing still dominated children's popular television, especially during peak viewing time, despite the voluntary self-regulatory policies. And there is a very clear need for a mandatory regulation by government to control these aspects. Now, as a matter of information, the guideline on advertising and nutrition information labeling for fast foods was introduced in 2008 by the Malaysian government, entirely voluntary for the food industry. And essentially, it restricts food advertising during children's program when the television audience is more than 4% and targets only ages 4 to 9 years old. That's a selective target. Now, the 2013 regulation, the Malaysia Pledge, which came out by the Federation of Malaysian Manufacturers, by which companies agree to advertise only products adhering to their own self-determined nutrient criteria, meaning companies determine what is the nutrient criteria. They don't adopt the WHO nutrient profile model. And here they say where they've raised from 4% to more than 35% of audience targeting children below 12 years of age. This is very important to understand. So to the final aspect, let's take a look at regulating food marketing, the urgent action for government policy. Now, we are moving into a new stage of food transformation, that is digitalization of food systems. And today we have to understand that mobile data usage has grown tremendously, particularly in Asia. You can see that India and Nepal is showing high growth compared to North America or Western Europe. And this is irrespective of rural and developing countries. Mobile networks are taking sales inside. Okay, so moving forward, what is the problem and the solution? Currently, most households in Asia have access to television. Mobile phones are going to change this. And what can be done is to, as going by the WHO's recommendations for food marketing restriction. 1, align age protection to all children up to 18 years of age. Apply the WHO nutrient profile models in classifying foods and beverages as not permitted or permitted, and restrict the power of marketing that appeals to children. Okay, so the WHO's position on food marketing to children has made it clear that this is a children's rights concern. Marketing of foods high in saturated fat, trans fatty acids, free sugars, and or salt negatively impacts several of the rights enshrined in the Convention on the Rights of the Child, including the rights to health, adequate and nutritious food, privacy, and freedom from exploitation. And the Committee on the Rights of the Child has stated that the marketing of such foods should be regulated. And this is a position recommended to every country. So in the recommendation, this was built in terms of aiming for reductions in children's exposure to food marketing. Now, children in this case refers to all human beings below the age of 18 as defined by the Convention on the Rights of Child under the law applicable to children. So these policies will work if they are mandatory. The age of viewership is older than 12 years up to 18 years, and uses a government-led nutrient profile model to determine the foods for which marketing can be restricted. Now, in terms of reduction in the power of food marketing, the recommendation is for effective policy design. The elements again are mandatory policies and the age of viewership restricting food to all children, and those, including those older than 12 years, that is up to 18 years. Now, do mandatory food regulations work? Yes, we have an Asian example, South Korea, which has a special act on the safety management of children's dietary life that came about in 2017. It restricts unhealthy food advertising on television during children's peak viewing time from 5 to 7 p.m. This is enough. This is only one. It is enough to prompt food companies to reformulate their products to make them healthier, to improve the food environment. Now, Chile has gone in for a deeper details here. The Chile food labeling and advertising regulation restricts all unhealthy food advertising that fail to satisfy the nutrient criteria set by the Ministry of Health, and focusing on the peak viewing time between, not at the, focusing on a broader aspect, not the peak viewing time, from early morning 6 o'clock right up to 22 hours, 10 o'clock. So they're not talking about even the evening sector. And I think this is very important because our 9-country study actually found that children were watching TV right up to 10 o'clock at night. Now, in Chile, they have evaluated and seen a decrease in the prevalence of unhealthy television food acts after the implementation came through. So in summary, I want to say this. Asian children live today in a landscape of global food transformation and naturally are at high risk for overweight or obesity. Food marketing is one of the drivers in the unhealthy food environment of children. In fact, I would think this is the major driver. It shapes brand awareness, taste, preference, and purchasing requests for unhealthy food and non-alcoholic beverages, which are profiled as ultra-processed foods high in fat, sugar, and salt, or HFSS. Television is the major media for children's food marketing exposure in Asia. And we see this unhealthy HFSS foods dominating the peak viewing time of children. We fear that personalization through digital media is going to increase this exposure. Government responsibility is to reduce exposure and power of this unhealthy food marketing through mandatory policies. Okay, now thank you. And I would like to also thank the Asia Pacific Pediatric Association, as well as Sri Lanka College of Pediatrics, pediatricians. My invitation came through these two associations. Now, the kind of work we are doing is not possible without receiving research funding from the IDRC. I have a very good team of support. William Ng Siho, Mr. Ong, and Dr. Sri Lakshmi Narayanan, who was my postdoc during this period. The broader aspect is research collaboration for the TV project came from the members of the Food Act Asia, 9 countries, as well as Informas, who provided the capacity to conduct our research. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Professor Sumudu.
Yes, thank you very much for that. All 3 speakers for the excellent presentation. I think we have.
Yeah. I think we can invite the 2 of our panel speakers for the open forum or questions. Professor Sumudu, please take it away.
Yes, so I'd like to ask Professor Karupaya whether it's very heartening to know that South Korea and Chile have had some success in the marketing strategies. Do you know what strategies they use to kind of, I think there's a lot of political resistance and leadership resistance to implementing these policies, which may be in place but not implemented. Do you have any experience about how that was brought about?
We have looked at the intentions of government. We have another policy paper that is looking at it. We have a systematic review that covers the intention, but very much so that because I'm looking at the policy perspective, we are looking at the ground level evidence, what's happening. And the policy perspective is that the will to take on tough legislation requires the will of government. So we can see that industry plays a large role in delaying the policy process. I've given you an example of Malaysia. We have been at it from 2007 onwards. Now, evaluating television food advertising was just beginning in I would say about 2005 onwards, when individual researchers started looking at the impact on food choices through school settings. We have some landmark 2 papers that came from from the US. You have Marianne Nestle, for instance, and you also have the other lady, Story. And but that sparked a little bit of interest. But developing a formative approach to gather evidence came about through 2012 through Informas, and after that, WHO took that up, and you can see from the series of recommendations they focused on exposure and power. Now we are looking at which countries that are looking at. In South America, it is Chile. Okay, Mexico has looked at a different approach. They have looked at a specific product and looked at sugar tax subsidies, but now they're moving towards policy. And from what I heard, it's not easy because government is afraid of losing foreign direct assessment, and that affects Asian countries, FDIs. Okay, and that means that there's reluctance to shake the boat. But the cost to health is tremendous. We need health economists to show that with children climbing up that slope of obesity and in later years developing the pre-diabetes or your pre-metabolic syndrome characteristics and tracking them, those kinds of projections are necessary to show that the healthcare costs are going to outstrip the cost benefits that they look at from FDI. So I'm sorry, I've got to take up this political way of talking, but it's true because we see that for most countries in Asia, it is still not mandatory, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes, it's true. Yes. Though the evidence is overwhelmingly against advertising, it's very difficult to, I guess, because of the financial
Yes.
kind of implications when we don't look at the health cost of the after.
Dr. Sumudu, I've
Yes.
got to also tell you that Korea
financial.
only did one arm. They didn't do all. They only tackled one aspect, the peak viewing time. They tackled that. But the Korean food industry is one of the largest in Asia, compared, and same with Japan. And there's a lot goes into food for developing of products. But the positive aspect of South Korea is this. When food manufacturers have moved towards reformulation, that's good. Now, the extent of reformulation is not known because let's say there's a sugar tax or the demand is to reduce salt or sugar. There is a bargaining there. If the sugar content is, let's say, 8% or 9%, when the nutrient profile model says if it's healthy, it should be 5%, the industry will negotiate. They won't come down to below 5. They may only reformulate to drop 1 or 2%, So is that clinically relevant? We don't know. Most of you here in this panel are physicians. So the clinical relevance of that 1 or 2% is not known. So you need subsequent studies to evaluate that. They're doing that in South America now. They're doing it because they realize that they have to input health impact measurements to piggyback policy implementation. They're looking at something as simple as BMIs. They're looking at triglycerides, but they're not looking at the harder aspects of monitoring from the health perspective.
Thank you very much. I wonder whether the audience has any questions. You can put it on the chat or you can unmute yourselves.
I think, Prof. Tilly, I think the same sentiments I also had from Sri Lanka, because it took a hard struggle, I think, for about 3 years after gazetting also, to increase the advertising age, targeting up to 12 years. It took about 2 extensions they were taking, and then ultimately only this year, January, we were able to implement that, where the banning came. And on the other hand, we have made a food profiling model. We have the book, we have the everything for I think more than now it's about 7-8 years.
Yeah.
It's there just in the cupboard under lock and key, not being used. So these are some other things that comes
Yes.
across the countries.
So those 3 specific recommendations is something that we countries have to fight for. It's going to take a lot of effort and to push it through. And this 12 and 18 years old, if we don't raise it fast now, it's going to be really bad because they're moving towards digital food marketing. And if laws are not going to when they bring in mandatory food marketing, they have to cover not just television, they have to cover digital food marketing too. So it's a big battle there.
So I was wondering actually while going through my mind was whether we could take it up, Jocelyn, from the APPA as a position statement for the region, because I think it has a lot of weight. Now the evidence is there.
Yes.
From the
I think,
WHO
yes, I strongly recommend this, Professor Pujita, because we need civil society. Pediatric associations are very important people. You are very important people here. And I think you all need to come in here now to look at policy advocacy and move that forward. It's very, very important.
I think we don't have anything to lose.
Yes.
We should.
We are the people who provide you with evidence, but please take it up.
I know.
Help to yes, move it forward.
Oh, well noted. Thank you very much. Yes, we'll surely do that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, may I ask a question?
Yes.
Yeah. So when I was making this, doing some research, I was surprised that we, as early as 2018, we already had something in place for increasing the tax on sugar, sweetened beverages. But inflation actually caught up. So that's why it hasn't any kind of impact. I'd like to know, is there a country that has been successful, taxing? Has it really decreased the intake of SSBs?
Okay. To start with, the best case is Mexico. And subsequently, you also have other countries that have come in. And you have data from health economists who say that health subsidies or not, I'm not talking about taxations, excise duties on sugar tax should be more than 20% to be effective. More than 20%. If it's less, if it's 10% or 8%, it's no use. But the other aspect which my peers, my colleagues were discussing last week, we had a meeting amongst our group, is that money should be moved towards health. That money has to go towards channeling health concerns in terms of tackling, let's say, obesity. Professor Lanto, you talked about health promotion, community engagement. This money should help to fund that. When you don't have structured finance programs, you can't add in the community engagement. Okay. So, but unfortunately, everyone, and these were countries, Mexico, South American countries who are really leading the front globally in terms of regulation and excise duties. They say that they hit a wall in terms of getting that money to fund health initiatives. That's a big challenge. It should go. So unfortunately, the money goes into the Ministry of Economics or Trade or whoever's generating the revenue for a country. It's not pulled out of that.
And I guess the other component that we didn't talk about today is the community empowerment, maybe targeting school children, preschoolers, teachers, and so on. We had with Professor Pujita and another team, we did a small pilot project on thousands young school children, 5 to 7 years, and saw quite a lasting change in their food habits using a storybook and a room-driven discussion, and that seemed to drive a demand for change even among the parents and teachers. But then it's very difficult to sustain them long term without funding. As you say, if the sugar taxes can be deviated to community empowerment, then that would be a win-win.
The government, I'll just give you a little thing. Sometimes it's counterproductive. We do have excise, but we also have sugar subsidies. You know what happens? So this is a problem. You, on one side, you give and you tax. The other side, you're giving sugar at low cost.
So thank you very much to all the speakers. I think we are coming to a close, and I think I'd like to invite Professor Pujita Vikramasinghe, President of the Sri Lanka College of Pediatricians, to make some closing remarks on this occasion.
Yeah, I think thank you very much for all three speakers. I think Tony, of course, had to leave a little early. And it's, I think, a very important area, because if we are serious about controlling non-communicable diseases, I firmly believe this is the point to start. It's not that 15-year-old or 25-year-old or 30-year-old that you are going to try to do that. So I think, as Dr. Emma highlighted, it's quite important that the trends are rapidly progressing upwards. And I think the recent World Obesity Atlas also highlighted that how most of the countries which has more than 10% annual increase rate was coming from the Asia Pacific region. And as you said that overweight obesity is surpassing undernutrition, I think that's a slogan which I have been also always telling. Undernutrition is a resource problem, whereas overnutrition is a knowledge problem. So we have to tackle this knowledge problem, not alone. I think, as Prof. Tilly highlighted, it is actually the whole, everybody is a stakeholder into this. I don't think anybody can wash their hands and say, no, we are not responsible. Everybody is important in this game, and it's important. So as Tony highlighted, I think there is no trading off between physical activity, sleep with other activities. So those are two important aspects. And even in my personal practice, I see experience, many are foregoing sleep. So sleep is not just, they are just studying or anything. These are small kids. They are using in the other way. So they get, on one hand, they get exposed to the blue screens, and on the other hand, they get exposed to the content of the blue screen. So those are some other main aspects that we have to then, as Professor Tilly, whom we have now worked, actually, I'm privileged to have been worked with Prof. Tilly as well as Tony. In the recent, we have done a lot of work with them. So I think now we have come to a point, I mean, education is there, true, but it is not going to stand on its own. And definitely the policies as well as the regulations, having policies alone is not going to work. It has to go into the regulation, because even I firsthand experienced what was happening in this country, which I was also an advocate. So the self-regulation, of course, does not really happen. It does not really happen. Only very few companies will oblige to that. But of course, it will be hard fought battle. So I think it is important that the governments come forward. But as Prof. Tilly said, they have to balance between the economy of a country as well as the other health aspects. So I think as a professional organization, which we have a lot of weight in giving persuasive messages. So I think as much as the power and exposure that the industry is making, I think we also have to make sure that our message has adequate exposure and power, which is filled with current evidence-based facts. So I think overall we have to move forward, and I think Dr. Jocelyn will take the lead in this,
Yeah.
and we will all get together. Probably
Yeah.
we can come up with a position statement, maybe a Colombo declaration even. We'll see. And I think this is something which is important, and especially the South Asians are not doing well when it comes to the NCDs compared to other parts of the world. So once again, thanking all of you and all the participants. I hand over to Dr. Jocelyn to continue with the proceedings. Thank you.
Yes.
I would say that, Dr. Emma, you posted on lots of bills are pending on SSB tax. I think don't wait for that bill to come in. You need to start your advocacy and say that push it to more than 20%, and insist that the money come in terms of taking care of community engagement to offset obesity. Who's going to fund it?
Yeah,
You got to start it now itself.
right, right, right. Just like tobacco control, right?
Yes, it's the same. It's the same. The
It is
industry
that.
has learned everything from the tobacco. They're engaging
Yeah,
the same way as the tobacco people were doing.
yeah.
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 They have the same script, the same
Same
arguments.
script, the same script.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we would like to acknowledge Professor Iqbal, the immediate past president of APPA. You want to say something, Iqbal?
No, I've been enjoying learning. It's a fantastic deal. Continue with the good things.
Thank
And
you.
very much enjoyed the input that has come about. Although I wanted to really find out why Malaysia was able to implement a law in 2007. What has happened to that law implementation since then, and what difficulties have they faced? It's something to peruse. There was no Malaysian person here, so I did ask that question. So we can pursue that later.
Okay.
Yes,
Thank you
you
very
can.
much. You have
Yeah.
been very great.
Yeah.
All right. So I think that ends our webinar. And again, on behalf of APPA, I'd like to thank our esteemed speakers, Doctors Lanto, Oakley, Tony, asked permission to leave earlier because of a family affair, and of course, Professor Karupaya Tilakavati.
Yes, you can call me Tilly.
Tili, and
Yeah.
the host for this webinar, which is the Sri Lanka Pediatric Association with Professor Pujita as the president, and moderated by Sumudu. Thank you very, very much. But before we all go out, we have to have a documentation of this webinar. May I ask everyone to put on your videos? Is that possible? Please. Everyone, please. All right, we have 4 pages. Okay, everybody, camera, action, ready. 1, 2, there. Next page, 1, 2. There you go. Next page, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so congratulations again. We had 100 participants via Zoom, and more than 60 participants via YouTube. Congratulations. Thank you. Thank you
Congratulations.
to everyone.
Congratulations.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.